Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, The Latest in Michigan Education. My name is Carissa Gallick, and I am the Public Policy Fellow at the Council of Michigan Foundation. Before we jump into the content of the webinar, I have a few housekeeping items to share so that you can participate with questions and comments throughout the next hour. If you have any technical difficulties, please contact ReadyTalk directly through the number listed on this slide. This session is being recorded, so we have muted the lines for the best sound quality. There is a question box in the lower left-hand corner of your screen, and that will be open throughout the session, and you can submit questions at any time during the webinar, and we will keep an eye out and respond to those questions. I will now turn it over to Karen Eldridge-Eason and Stephen Ariano in our Foundation Liaison's office, who will introduce our speakers.
Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, I guess it is now. Thank you, Carissa, for the introduction and the welcome. I am very happy that Stephen and I are really pleased that Alison Henry has agreed to help us with this presentation today. And for many of you, this is just a reminder, the Every Student Succeed Act is a replacement and update for the No Child Left Behind. And each state across the country is required to do a state plan, and this plan requires also participation and input from stakeholders and stakeholders that might not have traditionally been a part of the plan. So Michigan Department of Education has been going around the state holding listening sessions in order to get input. They are now at the time for public comment, and we had to have until Friday to do that public comment. And one of the things that CMF, the Council of Michigan Foundations, and Rob and Debbie were concerned about is we wanted to give foundations a chance if they wanted to comment on the plan, which is online, and there's a link to that, I believe, in the PowerPoint. So you will be able to put in some comments, but we have this privilege right now to chat with Alison Henry, who's going to walk through a brief PowerPoint with us around where the state is in their plan development and just sort of highlight some of the points. So Alison, we'll let you take it over, and then we'll introduce Jeff Guilfoyle and Michelle Richards for the second half a little later. Alison, it's yours. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to talk to everyone today. I want to, let's see, I'm not sure if I have the ability to advance to my next slide here. So there we go. Okay, got it. So thanks again for the opportunity to talk today. As Karen said, we are in the midst of the public comment period for the Every Student Succeeds Act for Michigan, and this is the federal funding stream that covers most of the early child, well, not most of the early childhood, but the K12 education in the state, specifically those aimed at students who are at risk or in the highest needs. We are just now ending or close to the end of the public comment process. It's actually open until this Thursday, March 16th. One of the requirements in the plan is that it also be provided to the governor for review, and we will be taking public comments and then finalizing the plan after the public comment period has closed. The plan submission date for our plan is April 3rd. And just to step back a bit, this is the federal fund, the plan for the expenditure of the federal funds under the Every Student Succeeds Act, but it's really based on Michigan's vision that was developed through public comment prior to the ESSA plan coming forward. I'll talk about ESSA in just a moment. But it really stems from Superintendent Whiston's vision to make Michigan a top 10 state for education within the next 10 years. When he took office a little over 18 months ago, that was his promise to the state board and to the citizens of Michigan, that he wanted to see Michigan's education stature rise. And right now we don't always measure up in the way we should in some national comparisons, and he has committed to changing that. So throughout the early months of his tenure, he engaged in a lot of listening from comments from stakeholders at presentations at state board meetings and through written public comment and a number of surveys to develop this plan to make Michigan a top 10 state for education, and it's on that basis that the ESSA plan was built. So we didn't start from scratch with federal money. We really want to see this work be done in a coordinated way, and the ESSA plan is just a way to help make sure that our federal funds are leveraged to support the top 10 and 10 plan. And so from the input that we got and the listening and the discussion and the research that we did to prepare for the top 10 and 10 plan, we really brought it forward into a series of 7 goals, and then from that some strategies to accomplish those goals, but really under 3 main focus areas, that being learner-centered supports, an effective education workforce, and strategic partnerships. And all of those together, really knowing that we have a need for a systemic infrastructure that can support all of those goals and strategies and initiatives. So we're really looking at trying to align all of our work around this graphic here to make sure that we have a system both at the state level but also at the ISD or regional level, and that the local school district and even local school building level that is all working in the same direction and all working towards the same goals. So we've been working on a number of different partnership things that we can do. And the vision for making Michigan a top 10 state in the next 10 years is really trying to make sure that our students are curious problem solvers, that they're really prepared to meet the demands of the 21st century workforce and become global citizens. And we need to make sure that our school system at all of the levels that we talked about really is preparing them to do that well. So that's our ultimate goal, is that the students leave school prepared to do whatever they choose to do in their next step, and we hope that that includes some level of post-secondary education or post-secondary training and certificate, the real global citizen. And then coming from that, we took our guiding principles for ESSA, that the children are the core of the plan. They need to have opportunities to learn regardless of where they start in the process, and that they need to have a system with access to excellent educators and supports that will help them do those things. Really, ESSA oversees some things that are part of the federal system and the federal requirements, including state standards that support career and college-ready goals, an assessment system that measures those standards that are developed at the state level, and then a system of accountability to help gauge whether or not the standards and goals are being met. And then in ESSA, which is a little different than in No Child Left Behind or the other education laws, there's really trying to drive supports and the funds to support the identified schools rather than having a punitive focus. It's really a supportive focus of where are the needs the greatest and how can we make sure that the supports are driven to those places so that they can get what they want done. And really, as I said, our ESSA plan is designed to be a vehicle that will help enact the goals that are in the top 10 and 10 plan and make sure that our ESSA plan is aligned to those goals as well. As I mentioned, the key differences from No Child Left Behind are really making sure that the accountability system isn't designed to be punitive, but to direct the supports to the LEAs, which are local education agencies, or in Michigan we call them usually school districts or public school academies. So we're not trying to create sanctions and negative labeling, but really saying how do we identify where the needs are the greatest? How do we make sure that the funds and the resources are directed in those areas in a way that's going to be meaningful and with evidence-based activities to get to the supports. ESSA also really emphasizes the focus on the whole child and a well-rounded education, where past laws had focused primarily on English language arts and mathematics. ESSA tries to put a focus on a well-rounded education that would include additional topics and making sure that opportunities for students are there. And looking more broadly, and this is a real opportunity, I think, for some innovative work to be done at the local level. ESSA also has been touted as providing a lot more flexibility for local school districts and states to kind of come up with creative solutions and ways that they want to do their work, as opposed to having specific models for school turnaround be prescribed at the federal level. We do have some intersections with state law that we're working around now, but really the federal focus now is trying to have each state and local district identify its own needs through the use of a comprehensive needs assessment, and then there's also a focus in ESSA on evidence-based practices that will help fix the needs that are identified in those comprehensive needs assessments. Integration of early childhood is also a focus in ESSA and is one of our goals in Michigan to make sure that all of our systems are aligned. And ESSA also calls for really strong stakeholder engagement and attention focused on government. And I skipped quite ahead, so I don't know if I'm running short on time. I know we'll want to make sure we cover it, but let me just slide back quickly to one. We are, a big focus of our ESSA work is the partnership district model, and this is something that's also part of Top 10 and 10. We have partnership districts where, and you may have heard about this in the news, this is something that we're sort of jump-starting at the request of the governor. Superintendent Whiston has offered the partnership model as an option for schools and districts that are facing the risk of closure of schools. And so we are currently, in fact, he's in a meeting with a partnership district now looking at ways that we can bring all of the community members to the table with the representatives from the school district and really focus attention on a locally driven support plan that will help meet the needs of those schools. And I'm missing, I guess, pardon me. I'm going to go ahead to our ESSA plan. Pardon me. ESSA plan, as we said, has been out for public comment and will be open through this Thursday, and we look forward to finalizing and then the real work of implementation and getting out there and working with our local districts to develop their own local plans with the input and stakeholder engagement from people in their communities. So with that, I think I will stop and answer questions. There were a few of the slides that we didn't get to in a lot of detail, but I'd rather answer questions where you have interest and talk about those opportunities rather than get into a lot of detail of the technical aspects of the plan.
Thank you, Alison. And I want to let our participants know that this was put together on Friday, Thursday and Friday. And I appreciate Alison stepping in, and I failed to say that she's the special assistant to the state superintendent in the Michigan Department of Education and serves on the cabinet of the superintendent. And she has had a key role in coordinating the ESSA plan for the state of Michigan. So we appreciate her willingness to step in today. She graciously agreed to do this. So Stephen and I told her we owe her lunches now. And also just want to let you know the Council of Michigan Foundation has been partnering with the Department of Education to make sure that the stakeholder engagement is thorough through a Kellogg Foundation grant.
Yes, Karen, thank you for commenting. I do have to apologize. I am not on my full game today. I'm fighting a bad head cold and just a little bit off. But I do want to gratefully thank the Council of Michigan Foundations for your assistance in seeking partnership and funding through the Kellogg and Steelcase Foundation grants, because this has really enabled us to do some broader stakeholder outreach throughout the state that would not have been possible without it. So we have appreciated the input that we've gotten that's enabled us to get out and hear from people and do some analysis of the feedback that we're getting that has been really important and really helpful in our work.
So today's another part of that, and we have questions lined up, it looks like.
Yes, we do. Would you like me to ask them?
Yes, that's fine, Carissa.
Okay, so Alessandra, I'm wondering if you can talk more about what you are looking for in the comments. How do these comments help, and how do you use these comments in finalizing your plan and sending it to the federal government?
Thank you. That's a good question. Public comment is a required part of the plan, but what's helpful to us is both places where there are concerns about aspects of the plan as well as places where there's support for aspects of the plan. I think sometimes people feel like comments are supposed to be criticism, but really we've gotten some very helpful feedback that says, I've appreciated the focus and the emphasis on whole child, and that helps us validate our work that we're doing around this, or if there are components or things that you feel are missing. Some of the other comments that are particularly helpful are specifically around implementation of, I like this piece of the plan, but it really will be important as you do this to remember this context as it gets to the local level. So things about sort of ways in which we're implementing the plan will be helpful. It can be as simple as, line 2.7 on page 14 has, it's not clear. Could you please provide more explanation so that those who are using this plan as their marching orders going forward can be helpful? So they can be very specific about specific details, or they can be very complicated. The more global direction and implementation feedback. And then how are they used would be, we will be reviewing all of the comments. We've had action teams working on this work on specific areas around accountability, assessments, supports, and the educator quality pieces of the plan. And we'll be both funneling the comments back to those specific groups as well as to our leadership, including Superintendent Whiston, to consider as the plan itself is finalized. And I think I see another question here about how can philanthropy get involved with local districts through the state's current ESSA framework. I think particularly in districts that we are working with in the partnership district model, philanthropic interests are one of the partners that we really want to make sure, specifically if there is a community foundation in that area or a foundation who focuses its work in that community. We'll want to make sure that they're at the table. And as we're working through this right now, it's come upon us fairly quickly, but as we work through this and make this more of a standardized format, that will be part of the protocol that's built into it. But we encourage you that if you have seen in the news, or if you're interested in wondering if you have a particular interest in a community, please reach out to our office or to the local school district and let them know that you'd be interested in working in partnership with them, or let us know that, and we'll make sure that that happens.
And we're, Stephen, sorry, Allison, but Stephen and I, Karen, would be happy to pass that information on to you from any of our foundations. And we can share also the information that you shared with us.
Sure. Thank you. I appreciate that. And we're developing this, so if there are ways that we can do this better or more effectively, we are more than happy to take that advice from you and work in that direction, because we want, this is really, each one is going to be specifically tailored to that community, so we really want to make sure that it's done in a way that makes sense for all of the partners at the table in that area, which might be different than the partners at the table in a different area. So your guidance and thoughts on what makes sense would be very helpful too.
Okay, we have another question. Somebody is asking that they read the state plan would eliminate the MSTEP test. So Allison, can you explain the rationale for this and what the replacement test would be?
Yes, I can talk about the superintendent's vision for assessment, and while it wouldn't exactly replace the MSTEP test. What it would be doing is the MSTEP test was the test that Michigan developed, and it replaced the MEP several years ago. And it's really aligned better with Michigan standards and brought in some level of more in-depth testing rather than just fill in the box bubble multiple choice questions. What the superintendent is proposing is to, in certain grades, build in a model that would be allowing for a benchmark test that would be shorter in the fall of the year to assess where students come into that grade performing, and then have a longer summative benchmark test in the spring and these are primarily in grades, I believe, 3 through 7. The spring test would then be a little bit more detailed and probably more similar to the MSTEP, but aligned with that fall test so that you can measure within your growth on certain subjects in certain grades. The test that and then the 8th and ninth grade students would be taking the PSAT 8-9 test, which I think, so the only change there would be that 8th graders previously took MSTEP and now they'd be taking the PSAT 8-9. And then 11th graders would continue to take the SAT, which is the measure of career and college ready, with some wraparound topics to cover the state standards that aren't covered by the SAT. The change is being proposed because we have been asked by schools and districts primarily to look for a test that aligns with things they're already giving. They feel as if they are not able to use some of the results on state assessments to measure the growth and direct some of the work that they do with students individually in schools because it doesn't get to the level of understanding of what they need to do and the data isn't available. So Superintendent Whiston, coming from his background as a local superintendent, has proposed this change to try to better measure within-year growth and to give some results at the beginning of the year that would allow schools and districts to target some of their interventions throughout the year and to align with some of the things that they're doing locally. We're trying to avoid double testing where a student is taking the state test only to provide the state accountability results and then implementing a number of local assessments that they've purchased separately to do the things that they need to do in the district. And so we're trying to have a better aligned system. They would still be designed to measure state standards and work towards the goal. So we're not changing our standards, we're just changing slightly the way in which we measure them at the local district to try to get better alignment with things that are already happening in the district and get them the kind of data that local districts need. At the same time, trying not to lengthen the state assessments. We want to reduce testing time for students in schools.
So, Alice-Ann, there also has been some who said that with these changes in testing, we won't be able to accurately compare ourselves nationally. Is that true?
No, that should not be true because these are still, again, based on our state standards. There are a number of different tests. The national comparisons are quite often based on national tests such as the NAEP test, and those are distinct from the MSTEP or the proposed new Michigan assessments or what MEEP was before. Those are still a sampling type test that measures certain students in Michigan schools and uses those to do national comparisons. Presumably, our tests we will be able to show how many Michigan students are proficient at certain points in the state, and our proficiency levels, which are still held to the same high career and college ready standards, will be a measure that we will use to look at our own progress towards growth and improvement across the state over the years. So a change in assessment because they are aligned to the same standards is not going to represent a start at square one for measuring our growth and progress as a state in terms of our student achievement.
Are there any other questions for Alice-Ann? If not, Alice-Ann, on behalf of the Council of Michigan Foundations and the Office of Foundation Liaison, we want to thank you. I think you get a Rob fabulous statement today for just being so fabulous and doing this, so thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. And if there are other questions, please don't hesitate to contact us.
Okay. So at this point, we're going to move on to the second half of our webinar, which is, as many of you know, on Friday, the Governor's 21st Century Education Commission report came out, and we quickly reached out to our friends at Public Sector Consultants who acted as project managers throughout the development of the report by the Commission. And they have been very gracious in also agreeing to, on very short notice, do this webinar for us. And Stephen, would you introduce Jeff?
Sure. Hello, everybody. So Jeff Guilfoyle is the president at Public Sector Consultants. He specializes in school finance, tax policy, and intergovernmental fiscal relationships, and issues pertaining to Michigan's economy and the state budget. Prior to joining PSC, some of you know that Jeff was the president of the Citizens Research Council of Michigan, an independent, nonpartisan public policy research institution, and he also served as director of the Office of Revenue and Tax Analysis in the Department of Treasury. And also joining him is another vice president at Public Sector Consultants, Michelle Richard, who specializes in a variety of issues affecting Michigan's education system. She serves as a lead researcher and analyst on large reports examining such topics as early learning and development, school systems and governance, and teacher quality efforts. So we're just grateful that you were willing to fit us into your schedule today, and I'll turn it over to you. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Stephen. We're really honored to be here and quite excited to share some of the work that we've been focusing on a lot, along with a 25-member commission for the past 9 months. Wanted to start with just a brief overview of what the 21st Century Education Commission is. In last year's State of the State, Governor Snyder announced the 21st Century Education Commission after there was such a tremendous focus on Detroit Public Schools the year prior. There was interest from his administration in looking more broadly at education concerns and opportunities across the state. So he convened 25 commissioners who represented education, business, government, nonprofits, to have a conversation about what the opportunity was to structure an education system for the next 30 years. When some of you look at the report and some of the recommendations, and certainly the press, there's been a lot of clamoring about what we can pay for right now and what we can't. And one of the priorities for the commission was to say, what's the vision and opportunity for the next 30 years? And the governor specifically requested that the commissioners not consider the constraints of today, whether they're financial constraints or political constraints, and instead to outline what a strong education system would look like in our state that could serve all children. So we did that by looking at top performers, states and nations. We looked at 3 areas in a lot of detail: governance, funding, and accountability. And then, of course, you've likely seen the commission report that recommends changes and prioritizes those opportunities. Like Stephen said, PSC served as the lead project manager for the project. We spent 1,000 hours working on this project in collaboration with the governor's office and commissioners. So we led an effort to ground the commissioners so that they had a shared understanding of existing systems. We led them through a visioning process, and we supported researching and drafting the recommendations. We helped to build consensus around those recommendations in collaboration with the governor's office and the chair, Tom Haas of GDSU, and then we led the drafting of the final report. Today, we're presenting to you, but of course, we were not the ones who approved any of the recommendations. The commissioners did all of that. So we're going to try hard to honor their perspective and voice. And if at any point we're speaking on behalf of PSC, we will clarify that in the presentation. If you're looking for a copy of the final report, you can go to mieducationcommission.com and download the full report. The executive summary is 146 pages, so it'll be good reading over coffee a couple of mornings in a row. This is a quick summary of all of the recommendations that the report put forth. The commission was really focused on building a continuum that started prenatally and went through grade 20. So we really took to heart a P20 education system and talked about what the elements would be that would ground a system like that, so that across the entire continuum, what are the things you need in place? We started by talking about the building blocks, which are the colored boxes that you see here. We talked about 3 core areas. Having a strong focus on learning, so that all of the work that we're doing is talking about what are we doing to improve outcomes in the classroom for students across the state. We talked about the need to create a strong culture of success. We know that education goes beyond the classroom doors. How do we engage parents, community members, state government, philanthropy, community organizations, and the list goes on, to be able to create a culture that says education is important, we value that as a state, and we support students with the tools they need to succeed. And finally, we talked about building a coherent, connected education system from prenatal to career. What you see in the triangles, or excuse me, in the bullets below the boxes, we list all of the guiding principles, which are the high-level, what we want to see in the system, items that the Commission identified. What we won't spend too much time on, at least in the presentation segment, is the key strategies, so the recommendations that support each of these elements. So guiding principle 1, for example, elevate the education profession. The Commission talks in great detail about what that means, and Jeff, when he presents about that, will preview it, but we'll save a deeper dive for the Q&A. The reasoning being, the Commission felt like the items that you see on the screen are the fundamental elements that we must have in place to have a world-class education system. The key strategies are items that they supported with consensus support, but that likely require a greater debate among all kinds of stakeholders in the state. But I think their hope is that we can have a core plan for our state. I'm going to turn it over to Jeff to kickstart us in the guiding principles.
And I'm sitting a little further from the phone, so I'm going to shout a little bit. Hopefully you can all hear me. The commissioners recognize the central role that teachers play in the education system, and basically that you can't be successful unless you have success in the classroom, and that really comes down to effective teaching if you're going to have strong learning. So it's by no accident that guiding principle number 1 is to elevate the education profession. And the recommendations that are under this are aimed at attracting, developing, elevating great teachers in Michigan. Some of the strategies that underlie this include enhancing teacher preparation programs, improving how we teach teachers and attracting the best and brightest to teaching, developing career pathways for teachers, so there are multiple ways forward, including potentially a master teacher role, who would be somebody who both teaches but also mentors teachers, and then improving professional development both for teachers and for administrators to make sure that that is more effective than what's occurring right now.
Commissioners also recognize that we need more support for individual teachers and administrators to be able to do their work successfully. So we talked a lot in guiding principle 2 about building capacity to do what works. How do we as a state identify effective practice? How do we help educators, whether they're teachers or administrators, access those evidence-based practices? And how do we make sure that when we roll out new initiatives that there are resources, whether it's professional development or funding for districts? How do we ensure that there are resources there to support districts as they're implementing the policies and programs that we believe work?
So the Commission talked quite a bit about funding. The first guiding principle around that, invest in an efficient and effective system of public funding, had a couple of key components. The first was to try to identify efficiencies in the system with the recognition that if you're going to potentially go to the voters and to policymakers to ask for more money, there needs to be confidence that the funds that we already spend are being spent efficiently. A number of commissioners noted the fact that Michigan is a bottom-performing state, but we tend to be a middle-of-the-pack spender. We're interested in investigating what the disconnect there was. And then after that, 3 key components. The first was to identify the base funding amounts needed, how much you would need to spend to get children to reach the performance benchmarks that we're setting. Then the second step of determining the additional resources that you would need to help disadvantaged students make those same benchmarks. And then finally, designing the funding formulas, the distribution system, that makes sure that all the schools and students have the money that they need to meet the performance targets. And then we had a guiding principle to increase post-secondary attainment. There was very much the recognition among the commissioners that that in the current job market that just going through high school wasn't enough, and that post-secondary skills and credentials and degrees were going to be essential. And so there were a number of recommendations around this. There was one on funding to determine the right funding levels. Then there was, as you may have seen in one of the headlines, supporting access to universal community college, there really was the feeling that K12 wasn't broad enough thinking and we needed to be thinking more in a P14 or P20 system, and making community college access universal was an important step in that, and that all children should have access to community college. Then there was a recommendation around making four-year degrees more affordable, but particularly for students who demonstrate merit. So community college for everybody, but students who are really demonstrating merit, we need to make sure that four-year opportunity is there for them. And then finally, supporting students with counselors who are skilled in post-secondary opportunities, both careers and in higher education opportunities.
Yeah, and with Guiding Principle 4, we shifted in that visual that we showed you a couple slides ago to the second box, which talks about creating a culture for success. And there was a sentiment among commissioners that with Guiding Principle 4, that was sending a message at the state level that if you are interested in pursuing advanced post-secondary education, that the state is here to support you. There was also the sense that from a cultural perspective that we needed to be much more intentional as a system to partner with parents. And the commission was very specific that partnering with parents has a broad definition, so any caregiver that's serving in the role of a parent should be engaged actively by their school system. We know that some families struggle to provide some basic needs for their children, and we believed that having human services more directly connected with schools was a really critical step in helping those families have their children show up to school ready to learn. Certainly recognized, the report kind of goes out of its way not to name specific programs, but we've made some success in this connecting human services in schools in the past few years, particularly through things like Pathways to Potential. We also believed that there was a necessity to foster collaboration between parents and educators in a much more active way by supporting parents directly to engage with schools, and then by supporting educators to have a broader understanding of what it would look like to more effectively engage parents and families. And then finally, in this guiding principle, we also talked about giving parents and families more information so that they were empowered to make the right educational decision for their family. So we have some tools to give parents information about how schools are performing, but there was an interest in making those tools much more user-friendly so that they could guide decision-making.
There was a lot of interest in improving the state's accountability system. There really was the belief among commissioners that to really become a top-performing state, we had to get accountability right. So there are several strategies that underlie that, but in particular, one, holding the right people accountable, identifying who should be responsible for what under that to make sure that there are clear lines of authority in terms of what people have control of, and then enhancing the data to make sure that you can properly evaluate those people. So that we had items around enhancing student achievement measures, making the data system better, and really making sure that we have the ability to assess how the system is doing, how students are doing, and that we can hold the various actors accountable, whether that be at the teacher level, the building level, the administrator level, and so forth. Guiding Principle 7, ensure access to quality learning environments. There was the recognition that it's very difficult for school districts in poor areas to afford the facilities that they need to really serve their student base. So the commissioners talked about how they could get additional resources so that all students would have access to 21st century learning environments. And so there was some talk for traditional school districts about how they could get access to additional funds and enhance their ability to raise revenue for buildings. And then also providing facility funding for charter schools, which is not currently available right now. And on top of that, putting in place a process that would assess before any district receives state funds for building that could assess that the building project was really needed.
Guiding Principle 8 highlights the need to invest early. There were a number of recommendations here, including universal preschool access for all 4-year-olds. In the same way that Jeff talked about the need to extend our view of formal education to 14 from 12, there was a sentiment among commissioners that if we want our students to be prepared for success, that we need to start earlier, and that shifting to a pre-K 14 system would be something that would really position Michigan for success. In addition, moving beyond 4-year-olds to the kind of 0 to 4 or to those children 0 to 4, we also talked a lot about the need to prime the early childhood workforce so that that workforce was supported more fully to be able to provide quality instruction and lead quality programs. There was discussion about an ongoing need to coordinate access and programming. So unlike so many of the topics that the Commission discussed, early childhood is not the sole responsibility of education. And so how do we maintain a focus on coordinating efforts across health, human services, and education so that there's a collaborative effort? And then finally, in investing early, there was an interest in improving outcome measurement. They talked a little bit about a kindergarten readiness assessment, a kindergarten entry assessment, whatever the terminology that you prefer to use. But there was an interest in understanding what works to be able to maximize both outcomes for children, but also the investment that the state is making. The final guiding principle talks about updating K12 governance. While the report was really focused on a P20 system, when it came to governance, there was a belief among commissioners that there were some real challenges in the K12 space that needed to be addressed before there could be a much more comprehensive look at a P20 system. So a lot of the preamble text talks about how updating K12 governance is on the path to creating this P20 system. One of the recommendations here was a headline for much of the media, and it talked about creating a sole point of accountability. The commissioners recognized that in high-performing systems, it was very clear to stakeholders who was accountable for results. And there was a belief among the commission that that wasn't clear in Michigan, and that one way to improve clarity of accountability was to ask voters to centralize authority through the governor, so that the governor would either appoint the state superintendent directly, he or she would appoint members to the State Board of Education, or a third option would be to increase the membership of the state board so that it would have elected individuals and appointed individuals. That's not the only governance recommendation the commission offered. They also spoke about the need to enhance the services and staffing at the Department of Education, to reconceptualize the current ISD structure to determine if that was the most effective organization of these regional intermediate entities. They felt like at the local level, it was really critical to support, not require, consolidation at the local level. And then finally, they tackled a really big topic last, to talk about ensuring access to high-quality education options for all students. It was in this recommendation that the commission indicated that they spoke extensively about school choice and that they were very interested in maintaining and supporting school choice, but that they weren't able to come to consensus on specific recommendations when it came to schools of choice or charter schools. Before we open it up to questions, I just wanted to make one final note that the commission did prioritize their recommendations. If you take a look in the final report, it shows short, medium, and long-term opportunities. But I just want to highlight a handful of the short-term opportunities, going back to those building blocks. So under the first box of focusing on learning, they really felt like an important first place to start was maintaining the high standards that Michigan has adopted and continuing to implement the assessment that we have in place. They felt like it was critical to focus on teacher preparation and started to create those multiple pathways. They felt like starting the conversation about funding levels was important and that there was no time to waste when it came to increasing funding for disadvantaged students. So they felt like while we figure out these funding levels, let's start increasing funding for the students most at need right now. Culturally, they thought that taking a step, oh, perfect, thank you, that taking a really significant step towards universal access to community college was important, including connecting students with school counselors that could help them prepare for their post-secondary plans. From a systems perspective, so the yellow box on your screen, again, maintaining standards, also moving towards a sole source of accountability, that's the state board recommendation, and then starting to look at how the Department of Education can more strategically support our entire statewide effort. They felt like were really important places to start. Chris, if you want to leave it on that slide, that might be a good one to have up while we take some questions.
We can do that. Thank you.
Excellent.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Jeff. This is Karen again. I don't see questions on the screen, but I have two, so I'll ask mine while I have a chance. When you were talking about the fiscal aspect of schools, was there any discussion among the commissioners around the legacy costs that particularly some of our public older school districts have?
So there was high-level conversation about legacy costs, but not specifically. It was more, I think, Karen, focused on looking at just determining how much money do our districts need in order to meet the performance standards and making sure they have that money. So if legacy costs are part of what they need to pay, make sure that they have enough money that that's not keeping them from meeting the performance standards.
Okay, thank you. Second question is around teachers. I've been reading a lot in national reports and things that almost always our less prepared and less effective teachers are in our poor school district or rural school districts, and is part of why the students don't do as well. Did they talk about that at all? How you mentioned getting quality teachers, but did they talk about the how to get the teachers who are there better prepared, or maybe shifting who goes where in any way?
Sure. So the conversation about teachers focused primarily on a high-level goal of having all of our schools, all of our classrooms have an effective quality teacher in that classroom. They didn't make a specific recommendation around how to ensure that traditionally underserved schools who may have more novice teachers in them, they did not discuss how to address that.
No, but Karen, I will say that the recommendation around providing additional funding for disadvantaged students gets at that a little bit in a backdoor way, in the sense that, what are the resources that you really need to make sure that disadvantaged students have an equal opportunity to have success? And so that recommendation really, I think, envisions spending a significantly greater amount on at-risk children compared to the base funding amount than we do now. And so that would get at that a little bit.
Yes, it would. Okay, thank you. Yes, we have a question about where does the report go from here? What are the next steps?
So I'll start and let Jeff jump in as well. As you saw, the commission submitted the report to the governor's office at the end of February, and then the governor presented it publicly on the 10th. I know that there are a number of commissioners making rounds with their networks or other organizations in their community to share the recommendations that were in the report. And we had an indication from the governor's office that they are now looking at the report with legislators and having a conversation about how to start moving some of this policy legislatively.
Right, and there was some money in the budget that was related to some of these items. In particular, there was a recommendation by the governor to significantly increase the funding for at-risk students. The preliminary recommendations were shared with the governor in around the December-January timeframe, so that he would be able to build some of the recommendations into his budget request.
Any other questions? Comments?
I have a few more. This is Carissa.
Great.
Jeff and Michelle, what aspects of the report do you think are like most ripe for philanthropic engagement and support, or where can philanthropy help with the report, like either the recommendations or raising awareness?
It's a good question. I think that there's going to be a need to keep this in front of people and move it forward to the extent that you can sort of keep the ball rolling on some of those recommendations. I think there are very specifically some recommendations in the early childhood side that are good places around system building and coordination. That's a good place for philanthropy to get engaged. Pushing that P14 model, that trying to get to build the belief that post-secondary opportunities are needed for everybody, I think is an important role.
Yeah, something that the chair talked to commissioners about a lot was needing to have a sense of urgency. A lot of the media coverage has focused on the recommendations, which I think is a good thing, but the report really focuses quite extensively on the problem facing our state. And many of you on the phone have seen the data over and over and over again, but trying to help build a sense of urgency in the state so that other people share that perspective. I always think, like, at what point is my mom, who's not engaged in education policy debates but has 5 children, at what point is she worried about the education system? And I think we're not quite there yet. And it feels like a place where philanthropy can be particularly helpful.
Right, and one of the issues, I think, the goals that are called for in the report, which I think are really solid goals, are extremely ambitious. In particular, as an example, we have a goal. Michigan currently ranks 41st in 4th grade reading and 37th in 8th grade math, and the goal is to have, by 2025, Michigan children be in the top 10 states. So, that's less than 10 years from now to move up something like 27 places, and that's not going to happen with incremental change. And so making sure that people understand that to build on what Michelle was saying, that where we are isn't acceptable, and that to get to where we want to be, we can't do this sort of slow getting better year after year, that we have to do something, we have to make some fairly fundamental changes to the system to move us forward.
I think that was something that is frustrating when you look at the high-performing systems research. It's not as though higher-performing states are doing something that we're not. They're doing a lot of things that we are, but they're much more effective. And so this idea that there's a better strategy just around the corner if only we could find it, I think is faulty. And that helping people to understand that it's not going to be a flashy new recommendation that's going to propel the state. It's going to be doing some of the really hard work to get into classrooms and schools and districts and really help them implement some changes. That's not glamorous, but it's going to be really important.
Right. We heard some conversation at the beginning of the commission where there was some rhetoric around, we have this education system that's designed for factories and it's in the 20th century, and we need to throw that model away and start over. But the reality is, when you look at top performers, it's still a teacher in front of a classroom. They are doing stuff very similarly to what we do. They just, as Michelle said, they do it better. And so we need to figure out how to do it better here.
So we have a question around the legislature. Are they being engaged in this conversation, and how?
Sure. So both the House and the Senate appointed a commissioner to serve on this commission, or they appointed two.
Yeah, majority and minority leader.
Oh, right. So there were two representatives that were appointed by lawmakers from the House and from the Senate, and they participated fully in the process, which I hope will help to ensure that the recommendations are making it to the legislature. Do you have any indication, Jeff, on more of the politics side?
So, I mean, I think at the moment, right, I mean, to be fair, some of these recommendations that are in the report would require a significant amount of new spending. So, you know, if you're going to really fund at-risk kids and bring them up to grade level, or if you're going to really make four-year universities more affordable, and I mean, there are several in here that take a significant amount of money. I don't think we've seen anything as of yet that indicates that there's a real interest in spending more money in this area. And I think that's part of what needs to happen with the follow-up of the report. I mean, I do think the message is starting to get out there a little more broadly about our current education performance, and Michelle talked about there's a lot of preamble in this report about that. I think that, you know, this is sort of a first step in helping to convince people of that, but I don't think that, you know, this report was delivered in the legislature as like, okay, let's spend a whole bunch more money. Fairly similarly, I think, to the reception of the infrastructure report. You know, to really make Michigan a top state in infrastructure, you got to spend more money. I mean, you know, the reality is we can get incrementally better with what we do now, but spending-wise. But if you really do want to become a top state, that takes a more fundamental change in the way we're thinking about stuff, and I don't think we've seen that reflected in the rhetoric yet.
So we have a last question about what happens to the commission now. Will they continue to be a commission and lead with the governor on these recommendations? And then I'm going to add a second part to that. Will the commissioners and or PSC be available to some of CMS membership if they want to help build more public awareness in their community?
So technically, per the executive order, the commission ends 90 days after the submission of the final report. 90 days? 30 days?
Maybe it's 30. I think
30
there may be
days.
a typo in the slide. I think the slide says 90, but I think it's 30.
But we did, at the press event last week, have a number of commissioners joke that they might have had a lifetime appointment, because I know that the governor's office has been very interested in engaging them to help implement some of these recommendations. They've indicated that members in their community have been reaching out to them personally to schedule events, and I think that is certainly appropriate, though to my knowledge there's not a formal mechanism through the governor's office to do that. I can speak for Jeff and I. We are more than happy to be an ambassador and support kind of building understanding of the report whenever we can be helpful.
And Stephen and I can also make connections for any of our members who are interested in getting a commissioner or someone from the executive office as well to be a part of this conversation. So I think we are to our end of our time, and want to thank Jeff and Michelle very much. I know you've been super busy, and we appreciate it, and we appreciate our members who participated today. And if there are no other questions or things that we need to do, Carissa?
Yep. So I echo Karen's thanks. Thank you to Jeff and Michelle and Alassane. Later, you will be receiving a copy of the slides from this presentation and a recording of this webinar. And that email will also include a survey link from CMS for an evaluation for today's program. Please take a few minutes to complete the evaluation. We consider your feedback very important. Please disregard the ReadyTalk default evaluation that will populate when you complete this webinar. For a full list of our upcoming programs, you can visit our website, michiganfoundations.org. So that is all for today. Thank you all again, and have a great day.